Welcome to Paternal Heart Radio.
Lumen Patriarcharum.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Lumen Patriarcharum. I'm very excited to have Kennedy Hall with us today. It's an awesome episode. Very humbled to have you on, Kennedy. I really appreciate you coming on. Kennedy Hall, if most of my listeners, will know his name from either the Meaning of Catholic or his book, right? Terror of Demons, Reclaiming Traditional Catholic Masculinity, which is an awesome book, but also from the Fatima Center, correct?
Yeah, that's where I do most of my work. Yeah.
Awesome. Yes. And so, check him out on the Fatima Center. That's awesome. I've been listening to some of the stuff you've been doing over there. I actually did not know you were over there until more recently. So
cool.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome stuff. But yeah, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to say the St. Joseph intercessory prayer.
Okay.
Jump right into that. And here we go. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. O St. Joseph, whose protection is so great, so strong, so prompt before the throne of God, I place in you all my interests and desires. O St. Joseph, do assist me by your powerful intercession and obtain for me from your divine Son all spiritual blessings through Jesus Christ our Lord, so that having engaged here below your heavenly power, I may offer my thanksgiving and homage to the most loving of fathers.
O St. Joseph, I never weary contemplating you and Jesus asleep in your arms. I dare not approach while he reposes near your heart. Press him in my name and kiss his fine head for me, and ask him to return the kiss when I draw my dying breath. St. Joseph, patron of departing souls, pray for us.
Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right. Very good. Well, Kennedy, if you would not mind just sharing a little bit about yourself. I know some of my listeners probably don't know who you are. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind sharing where you're from and what you're doing and all that fun stuff.
Sure. Well, I'm from Canada. Well, Canada's a big place. I'm from a little town in Ontario called Stratford, about hour and a half from the border with Port Huron. I've got 4 kids. We're expecting our 5th in late February, early March. And my oldest will be 5 in a little less than a month.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And as well as that, I'm a teacher. I'm taking a year off this year, though. And you know what I just realized? I actually have something in the oven that I have to go take out, otherwise it's going to burn. So can you hold the fort for about 27 seconds?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well,
absolutely,
I'll be right back. I totally forgot.
No, that's okay. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. A family man at work. That's for dang sure. So doing those duties. Actually, I think I've got a child up too. What are you doing? You're not tired? Well, Daddy's doing his stuff. So you want to say hi to Mr. Kennedy when he gets back?
Where is he?
He's coming.
Where's Mr. Kennedy?
Hmm?
Where's Mr. Kennedy?
Kennedy? He's the one that wrote this book right here. Can you believe that? I'm talking to someone who wrote a book. Yeah, you gonna say hi to him? Yeah?
Is this his house?
That's his house, yep. You see he's got corn up there? You wanna say hi?
Hi.
Hi. What's your name?
What's your name?
Zoe.
Zoe.
Oh, that's nice.
All right, sweetie pie, go back to bed, okay?
Cute.
Very good.
Yeah, we had bread in the oven. My my wife is very pregnant, and she got a really bad headache late today. So we had the bread ready. I had to put it in, and my job was to take it out before I started, and I almost forgot.
Oh, man. Oh, yeah, you can't have that. Well, that's okay. I was just telling the listeners that we have a dedicated, we're doing man things. And then I looked over and my kid's running out of the closet too.
Perfect.
So
We didn't even script that at all.
No, not at all. It's pretty cool, huh?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, I was saying, so I live in Stratford. My wife's expecting our 5th child. I'm a teacher, taking a year off. I just have another book coming out in actually about 3 weeks.
Oh, right on.
Or what's the date today? So October the 7th. So that's, just under 3 weeks.
Oh, right on.
And it's called Family Be Damned. It's a play on words because it's you're watching a couple devils try to damn a family during the lockdown. It's a fiction. So
right.
anyway, hopefully it's well received. So that's going well. And then things have picked up. I'm actually working for the Fatima Center sort of on a half-time basis this year. We're trying to plan an event for about 2 weeks from now on the Saturday on October 3rd. But our interesting government here in Ontario has decided to lock things down further. And that's a whole other thing. And so we're trying to decide whether we can actually do it or not without getting in trouble. So it's a minute by minute thing. We're waiting for every day. We watch press conferences and the premier is going to say something new and it's just a nightmare. So we're trying to figure that out. But there you go. But yeah, so it's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. We got number 5 on the way too, but it wasn't, we've been married 10 years. So every 2 years we have.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's just pretty awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So everyone, please keep an eye out for that book as well. And real quick, I got to plug our stuff because I always forget at the end, but yeah, come check us out, like our show, hit that notification bell, listen to the podcast, share the podcast with friends, and, please get this stuff out there. We have some announcements coming up soon for the Lumen Patriarcharum of some really interesting stuff that we've got planned for mid-October. Hopefully we'll be starting Zoom meetings and starting an enrollment process around the 1st of October to get people, just kind of small groups over online with all this COVID stuff and everything. So trying to make this nationwide and trying to build some virtue with some friends and meet new friends along the way. So please keep an eye out for all of that as well. Now that that's out of the way, and we can get to the meat and potatoes of what we're trying to do.
Where are you based in the States?
Right now, I'm in Virginia. So I'm originally from Washington State. I'm actually 30 minutes from the border of Canada. I spent a lot of my youth going up to British Columbia and Vancouver. So Vancouver got a little weird and scary as I got older. It's even worse now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we live pretty close to there. But yeah, I'm in Virginia. I'm stationed here. I'm in the Air Force.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, probably should watch what I say sometimes, but whatever. Yeah, so we've been here for a long time. My wife's from here originally, so we're trying to stay put as long as we can. So we'll see what happens. But yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, I'm an aircraft mechanic, good old grease monkey. So, but yeah, that's awesome. Well, Kennedy, I know why you wrote the book. It's in the beginning of the book why you wrote the book. But for those listeners, without giving too much of your book, because I really want people to support you in that. Yeah, tell us what kind of your thinking and logic behind writing the book.
Well, partly it was a spiritual exercise for myself. So full disclosure, I was raised sort of nominally Catholic. My mother's an Italian immigrant. My dad is from a long line of English Catholics, I guess you could say. So their faith was strong until the Second Vatican Council, which is the same old story you hear with a lot of people. And for whatever reason, there's lots of reasons why. So no one really practiced in our family. Anyway, I sort of had this vague faith. I had, as a young man, I actually went to a Protestant youth group just with a friend. He was just a buddy down the road from that good Baptist family, like really good people. I would spend a lot of time at their house, and he asked me to go to this thing. I remember I was around 11 or 12. I had some real encounters, in that kind of sense with God. I kind of knew he was real, but I didn't have any formation. So by the time I was done university, I was pretty much a pagan, I wasn't a full atheist. I could never really reconcile that. Tried, God forgive me, but it just didn't really sit well in my gut. So I sort of, for a long time, I actually listened to like Joe Rogan and stuff, and that's kind of that's the neo-pagan man thing, right? It's psychedelic drugs talking about that, and MMA and Vikings, and it's entertaining, but it's I don't know. Anyway. So I did that for a while, and then basically I wanted to be a teacher, and I wanted to work in Catholic schools because I went to them growing up, and I enjoyed my time. And I didn't want to be a hypocrite for whatever reason. And all my idiocy over those years, I still believed that if I was going to teach in a Catholic school, I should actually believe what the company expects me to believe. So, and also my no-no, that's Italian for grandfather. I dedicate the book to him. He's one of the people I dedicated to. And he was a man of faith, really was. So, for a while, I didn't see him very much when I was off at school. And then when I moved home, I had to take care of him for a while, him and my nonna, which was great.
Mm.
I kind of saw them again, and I realized, yeah, they're smarter than me. They're wiser than me. They're more well put together. I kind of have some things to learn. So I decided to give it a second chance, or kind of a first real chance. And then I did. So from there, we got married in 2012, and we didn't have our first son until 2015 because basically we just weren't living the right way. And then we started to live the right way, and then we've had kids ever since.
Oh, right on.
So it's been
usually what happens, right?
Yeah. So we just sort of I had a radical conversion, I guess. And then it came around the same time. I went to Guadalupe, actually. And that's in the last part of the book. And just had one of those moments. I can't remember if it was Hitchcock or if it was the Italian director who directed It's a Wonderful Life. But they said there's two things you should never film, which are the conjugal act, for obvious reasons, and prayer. Because both of them, you just can't show what it actually is. Mm. One's going to be an ugly thing, and the other one's just going to fall short of showing what it actually is, So, yeah, it's hard to explain what happened in Guadalupe, but something happened. So when I came home, things were different. Life was never going to be the same. It was around the same time we found out we were going to have our first child. And from there, I was like, oops, I got to be a dad. I've got to be a dad. I've got to be a Catholic father. I've got to do all this Catholic stuff, and I've got to lead my family and all these things I'm hearing about. I don't know how to do that. So I just sort of started a journey of trying to figure that stuff out. A lot of spiritual warfare stuff I looked into. And then from there, I realized, there wasn't a one-stop shop kind of book. I thought, men need to have a resource, because a lot of us, we're everything from, guys who work in the trades who obviously are intelligent, but they're not necessarily going to read big fat books in their spare time necessarily. Yeah. And then we've got guys who are super academic and they're kind of heads in the clouds or whatever, and they got to be pulled back down to earth. So I figured I'd write something that could appeal to most men. Tried to do that. I think my role as a high school teacher helped, because I'm able to explain things to a level where everyone can understand it. Mm-hmm. So I did that. I put the book together, and I realized, there's Jesse Romero, who does great stuff on spiritual warfare. Father Ripperger, obviously the famous priest exorcist on the internet. Taylor Marshall, just all these guys with all this great information. So I tried to put it all in one book. So that's pretty much why I wrote it. And it was also just really fun. One day I just decided I wanted to do it. So I had some fun.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's good. I will tell you, I commend you on this book, because you and Tim Flanders both, you have a way of writing, because I have his book as well. And book, I started reading his. I read his after yours. You guys have a way of writing books that's not, it's your book especially, it kicked me right in the mouth, which is really good. That's what I wanted it to do, right? Because I think as men, we look for that. We want something to kick us, a little bit, sometimes we need a little kick in the butt.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But it was simple to read, yet it was deep enough to where, I read your book in 2 days and I got so much out of it. Yeah. And I don't read books that quick. My wife was laughing because she reads books this big in 15 minutes, it seems like. But yeah, for me, I read it and I was like, babe, I read just under 200 pages in 2 days. She's like, oh, bravo. Yeah. Way to go. But it was awesome. It was a really easy read, and it was awesome because I was able to take what you wrote and implement it in my life immediately.
Awesome.
It didn't make it very difficult at all. So again, I thank you for that. Yeah. And your book came out right around the same time, I believe, as Father Calloway's came out about St. Joseph. Mm-hmm. And not to knock his book at all, but we did the consecration. Mm-hmm. And I had a really hard time reading that book as opposed to yours. And the only reason why is because it seemed like his was written for middle schoolers or high schoolers, whereas your book was much more, it was just kind of right up my alley. It was right. It was very straight to the point. His was a consecration book. I get that. So I don't want to get smacked upside the head for that. But yeah, your book was, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. I really do. And I wish you well on your next book.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So the book primarily, focuses, you say it right off the bat, right? Effeminacy. It focuses on that effeminacy that we all fight as Catholic men, right? We all are trying to fight this effeminacy. If you could explain a little bit more to some people, as soon as they hear that word effeminacy, they tend to their hair catches on fire. If you could maybe talk a little bit about effeminacy and why it's something that needs to be tackled, especially nowadays.
Sure. Well, I realized when I put the book out that effeminacy means a few different things, a few different people. It sounds like the word feminine. It has nothing to do with that. It's actually kind of a linguistic coincidence in English, because in its Latin and Greek usages, it's from completely different words. I don't know why in English it's like that. It's just kind of one of those things. And but basically, the definition that we used is from St. Thomas Aquinas, and it basically means a reluctance to suffer due to an attachment to pleasure. So it basically just means being soft, and that's actually one of the things that Aquinas says in the Summa. I can't remember the question part and all that, but it's in the book. But basically, he uses an example of, you could have a wall or a door that yields to blows, and you could actually say that's an effeminate door. It might sound funny, but it means that it just has no ability to persevere through any punishment, through any pressure. So you apply that to moral life, and it really is like when you say so and so is soft. I mean, you could use that in a derogatory sense. But in the truest sense, if we're talking about effeminacy, it actually does apply. And we all struggle with that in different ways. So, but a lot of people actually believe that the word means that. And some people have used it to apply to like homosexuality or something. So some people messaged me some very interesting messages when I first put the book out saying, how dare you? Because I have a line in the book that says effeminacy must be eradicated.
Yeah.
And they emailed me and I said, okay, we've got to clear this up. I'm not talking about that. And yeah, that would be a crazy statement in that sense. Yeah. But anyway, so it means a reluctance to suffer due to an attachment to pleasure, which is defined in the book for people that didn't read it. They could have just read it and known what I meant, but they just read the back cover.
Speaking of which, I found it really interesting when your book first came. I wasn't able to buy it when it first came out, right? But I went on, I don't know how I ended up stumbling upon Amazon.ca, right?
Yes.
.com, right? I don't know if you noticed, but I'm a toot my own horn. It was well received in the United States. It was not well received in Canada. And I was one of the first people to write a review on there. I said, wow, this book's amazing. And you know what? I haven't even read it yet. So I was one of your first.
Well, that was
defenders. You? Yeah, that was me. I get so sick of that stuff. I just started listening to you and Tim, and I'm totally throwing myself under the bus here, but I just can't stand that stuff. I hadn't even read it yet. I hadn't even bought it yet. I just heard about it. So, but yeah, I could not believe that. I could not. I still to this day cannot. I guess that's the cancel culture. I don't know.
It is. When it came out, people caught wind of it. We actually ended up doing some research, and one person made 6 or 7 different accounts. So in Canada, it has about 40 reviews or so. And I believe now it's almost at 4 stars. It's like 3.5, 4 stars, because there was kind of like 20 reviews in the beginning that were 1 star. Yeah. And they actually, it came out on like May 1st. I don't remember what the day of the week was. And by the end of May 1st, there were 20 reviews.
Yeah, it wasn't even the first day.
I didn't have an ebook yet either. So all it was a paperback. So Amazon Prime is fast, but in Canada, COVID made the reaction to COVID made it 3 or 4 days. So there was no way they had it. Anyway, so some of the reviews even said, I never read this, but I know it's trash. And I'm thinking, anyway, so, yeah. But some people actually ended up buying the book because of the reviews, because they saw it and they said, well, if this kind of person hates the book, then I'm probably going to love it.
Very good.
So in the States, it has 4.5 stars or whatever. I mean, it's all 4 and 5, and it's people who've actually read it. No one knows me in the U.S., so I don't have a vendetta against me. Yeah. So I've got all these friends down in the South, and I've only ever been to Buffalo, Port Huron, and Detroit. I've never been in the States anywhere. Oh wow! And it's funny. I got all these friends I got to finally meet when the borders open up. So. Yeah, no kidding. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. So. All right, so back. Yeah, I just still can't get that out of my head because they were canceling your wife too. I was like, oh my goodness gracious, these people. So yeah, back to I guess this could tie right into the fruits of effeminacy, right, or the lack thereof. All right, yes. Of those fruits. So obviously we can see some of that right now in the cancel culture, right? We see a lot of effeminacy in there. There's no intellectual, nobody wants to think anymore. They don't want to rationalize through things. And we see that with BLM down here in the States. I don't know how much you guys are faring with that necessarily. I know it was a little bad for a while, but I know down here in the States, it's ridiculous. People are, they're not thinking about things logically. They're not taking a step back, What are some of the other fruits or lack thereof that you see of effeminacy? The main one that I address in the book, to be honest, is pornography addiction. It's a plague. It's a disastrous scourge on mankind. And if I was king, it would be illegal in a heartbeat, and pornography producers would be hung in public. I know that sounds a little bit extreme, but I mean it. So it's Aquinas says that a heretic could be liable for the death penalty. I mean, think about, anyway, it's bad. And it's really bad. And it gets, you look at the statistics, and depending on how the statistical organization defines addiction, whether it's habit or compulsion, whatever, the point is that upwards of 75 to 80% of men have some sort of, habitual or frequent usage. It could be complete addiction where the guy is like obsessed and multiple times a day, or, it could be a couple times a month, whatever. But the point is that most men in some capacity are dabbling in it, if not completely enthralled in it. So that's sort of the main thing. And I realized that talking to a lot of people, and I said, man, people struggle with this. So I wanted to talk about that. Yeah,
that was something that that really hit me in the book too, because I was one of those people that I'm a statistic, quote unquote, right? I was 6 years old, when I first saw, pornography. And it wasn't just a picture either. It was, hardcore stuff. It wasn't anything, that, just crazy. So, and it seems like the age is getting younger and younger.
Well, the average is about 8, which means there's some that's 5 and there's some that's 11. It's we have a VHS/DVD player in our house, actually. Right. We found it at a Goodwill or whatever, Value Village used store. It's our second one because one of our children broke the last one. And and we have Apple TV, which we're actually going to get rid of. And we're just getting like a Chromecast thing. Mm-hmm. We have no cable, and we just take away the ability for the kids to access things. It's just too much. It's not worth the risk. Apple TV, even the home screen, it's fine. Like, they don't have obscenity on there, but they could click, and then they get into the movie section or something. And just the cover images alone are scandalous. It's everywhere. So we don't have iPads. I like iPads. I just don't have one. But our kids don't have them, is what I mean. And I have a computer, and that's it.
Yeah, that's how we do it too. I mean, we've got 5 kids. I mean, my oldest is 9 years old.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. But it's sad that I can brag that my child has never seen pornography. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Because we have this one computer that I'm using this with, right? It's old, but it works. It does the job. I've got my iPhone. I have an iPad. I'm a certified flight instructor outside of my job. So I teach people how to fly. So I have my iPad's got all my charts and all that stuff on it. Yep. Right. But, my kids they're not allowed to touch them unless we're sitting right there, mm-hmm. And my wife and I made it very clear from the start that, when we first got married, like, screens are not, you mentioned screens, media matters in your chapter, media matters. Mm-hmm. And screens are, a mind killer. They just are, especially for young kids like that. My kids, when they get a hold of them, they figure them out so fast that it's almost scary how quickly, like you said, they could just click, and all of a sudden they're finding stuff that they shouldn't have. We had Netflix. We just got rid of Netflix because of that whole debacle as well, which we had gotten rid of it in the past and then brought it back, and then got now we're totally done with Netflix. But even some of these things like Netflix, like you said, that movie that came out, Cuties,
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's just nuts. It's absolutely insane. But that's what the pornography culture is breeding right now. It's going down that slippery slope that everybody was like, oh, it's not going to happen. It's not a big deal. And now we're finding ourselves full bore into it.
Well, and people don't realize, pornography usage is violent, actually. It's an act of abuse. That's why we call in the church self-abuse, because, it's sterile, for one. And actually Dante talks about that in the Inferno. And he talks about, it's not pornography, but he talks about sterile prostitution type things, self-abuse, whatever. And anyway, it's not a good punishment that he levels out in that book. So
no, not at all.
Go to confession, if you need to. Let's be honest. But you're using yourself and you're using somebody else. And one of the things I would always tell kids, and it would freak them out, if you had a class full of 20 boys and you want to get them to be quiet, you just tell them certain things. And probably about a quarter or so of the women on screen are actually dead.
Yeah.
Because they have such a high, I mean, I'm ballparking here, but they have such a high suicide rate.
Yeah.
It's a terrible, it's an industry for criminals and drug addicts, basically. So it's the Jason Everett, you know, who he does a lot of the speaking on this stuff. And one of his talks that I've shown to students many times, it's called Detox. It's a really good talk. And he basically says in it, you know, he says pornography is the playground of the damned. And he heard that from a producer who actually kind of was born again after I left the industry. So it's not good stuff. So how does effeminacy apply into that? Well, you know, the sins of the flesh are a really regrettable sin because in a way they're actually the easiest to avoid. You know, you can understand, for example, how a young man, you know, he might fall into a sinful habit or activity or action out of circumstance. You know, maybe he robs a convenience store because he's dirt poor or something. There's a utility to something like that. It's wrong, but you can understand it from just a human perspective. Well, how could you get from A to B? Well, dad's a deadbeat and mom's broke and the kid robs a store or something. It's dumb, but it happens, right? You'd almost be less culpable in some ways given the circumstances. But sins of the flesh, they're just against yourself and there's no utility to them. They're sterile. They're not life-giving. They're abusive, et cetera, and they just are. What they are is the result of a man, and in many cases a woman, who just can't allow himself to just say no to a momentary pleasure for a very little amount of suffering in order to do something in order to avoid something that's harmful to himself. And that's why they're the ultimate sin of effeminacy, because they're the using of oneself because you just can't withstand a little bit of temptation. So there you go. That's why effeminacy plays into that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So if you guys are listening, man, and you're struggling with this, get to confession immediately, because for that little bit of a second, you know, you just threw yourself into hell. I mean, that's what happens. You've completely used yourself and used any means that you could to have 5 seconds of pleasure. And was it worth it?
Exactly.
Never worth it. And what we use Covenant, you know,
yep.
That's a great, fantastic software. You know, my brothers and I were real close, and we all keep each other accountable on that. It's pretty awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. And then, you know, my wife's got the thing on there too, just in case the kids get on, she can see what they've been doing, and which they don't, you know. And you see that a lot now too. What worries me a little bit with this whole, you know, COVID stuff with kids doing stuff at home. My wife decided to homeschool this year because there was no way they wanted our kids to be on a computer for 8 hours a day and not
That's crazy.
listen. Yeah. Not listen to what they wanted to teach my kids. I was like, no way. That ain't happening.
Yeah. That's nuts.
No. Yep. So yeah, don't, man, if there's any takeaways from there, you've got to be the man of your household. You've got to limit the screen usage to your kids. You've got to tell them no. You know, that's another thing too that I've noticed is, a lot of parents just don't want to say no. You know, the fits of rage that come when you take a screen away for some reason. It's just so.
It just shows. I mean, you know, one of the signs of well, Father Ripperger talks about it. One of the signs of something being a demonic attachment, not necessarily that you're possessed or something, but it's not from God. Is, you know, if it's basically if it's not useful and you throw a fit when it's taken away, that's wrong.
Yeah.
You know, if you're hungry and somebody takes your banana, it's like, hey buddy, it's a useful sort of fake. Give that back. Excuse me. But if it's just an iPad and you're playing a game, it's like, well, you're attached and you need to get over that. Yeah,
absolutely. Do you think that, you know, the sins of pornography and things like that ultimate effeminacy that you put kind of the hierarchy up here, that kind of leads us to the other marks of effeminacy, right? Of being an effeminate man. You know, that leads to things like indecision or moral relativism.
Yes.
Yeah,
100%. And who was I listening to? E. Michael Jones. You know E. Michael Jones?
Yes. Yeah.
He's very interesting. You can never pin that guy down.
Yeah.
1 minute. Yeah, he's wonderful. But but he's wonderful on history, and he was talking about I think it was the communists in Russia, like in the early parts of the last century, and they realized that there was no sense in ever arguing a seminarian because the seminarians were very, very smart. Oh, yeah. So you couldn't argue them out of their faith because Catholicism, and I guess in that case Orthodoxy, it's eminently reasonable. So using reason against something that's eminently reasonable is a losing battle, essentially. So they actually found that what they would have to do instead, and was most effective, was they would institute or introduce sins of the flesh. So they found a way to do it with women or whatever they did. and the men would eventually reject their faith because of the sins of the flesh. And I don't know, I guess a better theologian than I could probably explain what that is, but the cause and effect is pretty obvious. So,
Yeah.
sin darkens the intellect.
Mm.
Sin makes you stupid. And there you go.
Yeah, I was just going to say that Tim Flanders and I briefly kind of mentioned some of this stuff about the sin darkening that intellect, and that's so true. And it does. It makes you just, when you fall into that sin, it makes you more prone to things like gluttony. I mean, you really have a hard time denying yourself when you're just constantly wrapped up, in that pornography or even just any of the sins where we, sins against the flesh, period, gluttony, overeat, which is something I struggle with that a lot growing up, was giving up the donuts, man. That's my Tim Hortons, shout out
Tim Horton. Do you guys have that where you live?
Not where I live, but
Okay.
we had it we had one in Washington State, and then we had one when I went TDY to Dover. I was stationed in Alaska for 3 years.
Okay.
And so we did have, some stuff up there as well that flowed over from the Yukon.
Tim Hortons. Goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. But I have a deep love and affection for donuts and pastries. So that's, but I have noticed that in my life. If I'm not keeping things uptight, you know what I mean? It's very easy to slip back into those old sins, and before you know it, you're not able to deny yourself anything.
Yeah. You have to have a routine, and you have to, the sins of the flesh, they're all related. So that's why our Lord says to fast, because, ultimately, if you can deny the basic necessities like food, that's something you actually need, then you'll have the strength to do with things you don't need, right? And that's how it works.
Absolutely. Talking about, well, you just mentioned it, but a rule of life, right? You said you gotta have a routine, right? Something we're big on with the Lumen Patriarcharum, something we're trying to try to help men do, once we get people signed up and come with us, is one of the first things that we're going to have them do is build a rule of life that has to, something they can do, something that's possible for them. First of all, what is a rule of life? We've talked about a little bit on our show, but just to get another opinion on it. And then second question is, how does a rule of life help us to combat effeminacy?
Okay. Well, what is a rule of life? Well, basically, I say in the book, I distinguish between a rule of life and a schedule of life. A rule of life, basically it means, how do you normally live your life? What are the tenets that you have that no matter the day, for the most part, I mean, barring sort of extreme circumstances, how do you get those things in? So you're going to look at your life and you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to have a morning prayer. That prayer could be an hour, depending on the season you're in life. I know for myself, I've got little kids who wake up very early. I'm trying to make this career as a writer and stuff, so I get up very early to do my work. And I have limited amount of time. So my morning prayer is 10 minutes. There's some various prayers that I like. And then you have maybe a little bit of spiritual reading. Maybe you have little prayers in the daytime, little things here and there. Then you have your family rosary. And then, throughout the day, you might fill in whatever fits your station in life. So you're going to work out or something like that. Now, that's a rule of life because all those things are movable. So if my kids are up all night with stomach flu, it's not as if I have to finish my divine office by a certain time in the morning, because if I don't, I'm, not fitting some sort of schedule. No, I got morning prayer, and usually I wake up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock. But if it's been a weird night and I'm in bed till 7 because of whatever, it's like, well, I'm getting up and I'm praying is the point. Like I get up and I pray, right? That's the rule. And then as far as the rosary goes, let's say in my life, well, a lot of the time we pray all 5 decades as a family. But tonight the kids had a real hard time behaving, and we got a decade in or so, and we had to go to bed, and that was just all they could handle. I had promised them some ice cream because we were supposed to go on a picnic, and my wife came down with this migraine, so we couldn't. They were all upset. I said, oh, we'll have ice cream, don't worry. So I had ice cream about 7:30 with the kids, and they were running around like crazy people till 8 o'clock. Oh, and so when it came time for the rosary, they weren't very happy. Well, they weren't very behaved. So
No.
Anyway, I had to do it in pieces today, but I did my rosary. Okay. And that's, part of my life, right, with kids. And so anyway, that's the rule of life, is that you're able to fit in all the things that you need to do as part of your spiritual life because they keep you grounded. But you're a dad, okay? You're not a cloistered monk. You don't have, like, you have literally your schedule. You can do it as best you can, but it's at the mercy of everybody else in some ways. So you just make sure that you have a rule rather than a schedule. And then what was the second question you said?
Second question was, how can a rule of life help us to defeat, or at least, get rid of effeminacy? Yeah.
Well, because for one, praying is actually kind of hard for one. I mean, it's weird. Every time I am about to start the rosary, and I love praying the rosary, but it almost feels a little bit like it's going to be a daunting thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I'm just going to pray this thing for 20 minutes. But then when I'm halfway through, I'm like, I could do this forever. It's a weird thing. It's kind of like a workout, to be honest. You start and you're like, I'm stiff. And then you're halfway through and you feel great. So it's kind of like that. So that's so as far as how it beats effeminacy is, you're just doing something you don't necessarily want to do, for one, which is always good. And also from a practical spiritual level, you're making sure that you keep your eyes on the prize, right? You're waking up in the morning and you're praying a series of morning offerings and prayers. Well, okay, you're starting your day with thinking about heavenly things. And then, I don't pray it every day. I try to, but I have the Angelus remote or reminder on my phone. And it's noon, and I hear this, these church bells go off on my phone. It's okay. Well, and you know what's funny? Even if I don't pray it, I'm still reminded by that app or by that alarm of that I should be praying. And then I usually, let's say I'm in the middle of doing something with the kids and I just can't at the moment, I still at least say a Hail Mary in my mind. It's kind of like, awesome. I'm reminded that this day is about God. That's kind of the point.
Awesome. Yeah.
So, and it's hard to fall into certain sins when you're thinking about God. It's just, I saw this men's conference speaker once, Deacon Harold Burke. He's wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
He's really great.
Yeah, I love that guy. He's fantastic.
Awesome. And he was talking about like natural family planning, when you have to abstain and things. And he's so funny. And he said, there's two things. He's so loud. There's two things I do when I want to, consummate the marriage and my wife isn't, we can't. And he says, one is I go pray the rosary, because he says, you're not going to keep thinking about, doing, what, when you're talking to your mother. Yeah. And secondly, he said, or I read St. Thomas's Summa. I read the Summa Theologia. In that case, I just fall asleep.
Yeah, that's
so
that's awesome.
Those sort of things, they just help you stay on track.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I could definitely identify with the NFP thing. That's my wife had some medical issues, like in between each kid, there's always been she's got some medical stuff. So it can be really tough sometimes, but it's good for you though. It really is. It's tough. Yeah. It makes you frustrated, but it's really good for you. So also I think, since I started doing, I also want to just piggyback on what you said about the rule of life and the schedule of life. I love that distinction, because a lot of us, especially us traditional Catholics, we sometimes we think we just got to be like boom, boom. And I've been guilty of that too. And then it's almost like you lose the fruit of the whole thing, because then you're just, I didn't do my thing today. And you're beating yourself up all day. And, so I'm really glad you brought that up. Also, in my life, and please comment on this if you want, but in my life, I've noticed it makes me more humble. It brings about more humility in my life when, I subject myself to, kind of that rule of life, right? Because I'm taking away time from my day, giving it to God. And sometimes it's not perfect. Right. It's not perfect at all. And so I have to come before God as this child, and kind of sit at his feet and say, all right, Lord, this is all I've got for you. Yep. I am not a superhero. I cannot do all this at once. Here's my humble and meek offering, take it for what it's worth, hopefully.
Yeah. It's a very loaves and fishes type thing.
Yeah.
Here's a little bit, Lord. I need a lot.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. We kind of already covered the other part, but your chapter on taming the horse, it helps to do that as well, which we kind of talked about, because it brings us into that spiritual mindset, like you just said about praying the rosary, falling asleep, reading the Summa. Yeah. For me, it's definitely helped me with my patience, because as you know, Kennedy, having kids teaches you how impatient you really are.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So in my life, it's definitely helped with that. That's for sure. Another thing that I hear a lot about nowadays. Something I always struggle with growing up was, and I always sought it through weird means. There's a lot of questions right now. A lot of things are up in the air, so how do we, discerning our will for God's life, or excuse me, our God's will for our life. That's a big one too. How can a rule of life help us to discern that for our lives and our families' lives?
Well, earlier, so we're trying to plan this event for the Fatima Center, and it's been a nightmare. It was actually, everything's changed in the last 48 hours. And we've already sent out mail. We've sent things to the printers. And anyway, we organized video guys and things. And we were supposed to show up at the Queen's Park, which is like our Ontario provincial legislature. We didn't know if it was going to be 50 people or 200 people, whatever. But basically, there's been all these protests going on for everything, which is, I'm not commenting on whether they should or not, but there's been all these protests, and they have been relatively peaceful. We haven't had crazy riots, which is great. Yeah. But nonetheless, there's been groups of thousands, and all of a sudden, the police force in Toronto gets word from the premier that he wants you to give out tickets to people who are protesting, which is actually against the law in Canada. We have like a constitution and a charter. It's weird times we're in, so all bets are off. People are acting strange. So anyway, point is, I was just like, man, I was just stressed out. I'm thinking, what am I going to do? We just sent all this mail. We got to send out, a lot of these people that are on the mailing list, they just get paper mail. They don't get whatever. So we're going to have to mail everything out again and whatever. Are we going to get fined? I mean, we're just thinking about all these things. Yeah. So I just prayed the rosary. I work in my bedroom. That's my office is. And I just kind of got on my knees and prayed a decade. But it was the only thing I could do at the moment. And to be honest, just having a reminder that I'm supposed to pray before, when pray for all important decisions, it stopped me from becoming much more stressed out. And I think that a lot of men who work in whatever job they're in, finance, medical care, I mean, there's reasons to be stressed in every profession. And I think most people don't resort to prayer, and they especially don't have a rule of life if they're not a practicing Catholic. And even if they are, they might not resort to prayer when they're stressed out, which means things are just going to compound, and you're going to try to do everything on your own steam, and you're going to end up getting agitated and make a mistake and take it out on your family or whatever. So that's just one simple way today, how a reminder that I should pray through these things because of my rule of life and getting the rosary done every day. That actually helped me a lot.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that's which kind of leads me to my next one. One of your actually one of the most impactful stories that you had two stories really. One was in the beginning of the book. One was in the chapter Camel Knees, which I love. That's absolutely amazing. But what you're saying totally reminds me of that, because we shouldn't be making decisions at all unless we have we've taken it to Lord first, right? So I would, in the past, I probably would have been one of those guys. Have you ever seen the movie Office Space? It's an old movie.
Parts of it. It's a little bit before my time, to be honest.
Yeah. Oh, gotcha. So I saw it a long time ago, and there's a time, he sues this guy who hits him or whatever, one of the gentlemen in the movie, and he makes what he does with the money is he patents a jump to conclusions mat. Okay. It's literally a mat that he jumps to a conclusion. That's awesome. Yeah, it's pretty funny. But it just reminds me of that, because that was my previous life. Something happens, bam, jump to conclusion, pray later. Come into it, pray later. And unfortunately, down in the States, we see that a lot. Like you, I have no problem with protesting things. We have the constitutional right to do that down here. It's when it starts to devolve into craziness. That's when a lot of us should have a problem with that. But that comes from people just not, you know what I mean? Not taking things to God first, when injustices happen I've had plenty of injustices in my life, at least perceived injustice. Right. Mm-hmm. So, but now, taking these things to the Lord, especially over the last couple of years, especially with my kids, my family, with moving, with, whatever's going on, trying to do that. That's, gosh, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that's so important. If we're not taking it to God first, how the heck are we going to know what we're supposed to do to begin with? And he's not always going to give us the answer either. Sometimes he kind of leaves it up to us, but at least we know we took it to him first. And at least we've hopefully thought through the process. So guys, if you're listening out there, if anybody's listening out there, please, think through things, pray on things, give them to God first, take your time with it. Don't be impatient. There are times we have to make good quick decisions, but if we have a rule of life already in place, if we're already communicating with God, we can do what St. Joseph did and just pack up our family and go to Egypt. We don't even have to think about it. It's boom, we're out.
Yep.
So
Right.
the two stories that you mentioned, number one was your coaches.
Mm-hmm.
So that example, that was awesome. That was a really neat story to see your coaches. And then number two was the professor who was very intellectually, Christian. She wasn't Catholic yet, right? But she was very, very intellectually Christian. But when she finally, ventured into a Catholic church, finally, she's very anti-Catholic, ventured into a Catholic church and saw the people in their piety, and their kneeling and their actually physical manners, their example, right? Setting that rule of life for our family and being the example, right? How can we do that? Sorry, I'm tongue-tied here. How do we, or what kind of good will that bring about in our family if we can live that example? If our family knows we have the rule of life.
Sure. Well, just for context for people, with the example of the coaches, it's a brief little story in the beginning where I basically saw my football coaches, who were my heroes, I saw them kneeling at mass, and that was the first time I ever saw them do that. And I thought, oh, wow, these big, tough, they were very imposing men. I mean, not just because they were my coaches, but they were actually pretty physically. The one guy, only about 5'10", but he almost played in the CFL, which is Canadian Professional Football League.
Right
the wide receiver, his bench press was like amazing. He was so strong, he was so fast. And other coach was 6'5", and he used to use a hockey goalie stick. So he was our defensive coordinator, and he used a hockey goalie stick where he'd actually cut off the end of the stick, so it was just a stick in the paddle, and then he taped a football on the end, and he would use that as when we practiced for defensive line, he would use that as like the snap. So we'd watch that to not go offside and to react quickly. And then when we mess up, he'd whack us with it. And it was amazing. And, I did a skit of him on stage. And he was 6'5", and he would boot us in the chest on our football pads. It was amazing. He was the legend. His name was Coach Hall. People thought I was his son, but I wasn't.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, and then we had our head coach, who was a big, burly Italian man. And his forearms were just like the size of my calves, and he was just classic old school Southern Italian, awesome. Anyway, these guys were all faithful Catholics. I had no idea, but I saw them at mass kneeling, and it was wow. That stuck with me for a while. Just simple. Saw them kneeling. It was like, wow. I say in the book, they looked taller on their knees than they did when they were standing. There was something about them. And then the story that I write about this woman who was an anti-Catholic and then actually became a nun. I read that story once on Relevant Radio, their website. And I read it like 2 times through, and I was amazed at it. I couldn't find it again, but I had memorized almost all of it when I came to writing the book. But in both of those stories, what you see is that basically just the simple witness of Catholics living, I call it a 3-dimensional faith, because my no-no was like that for me. I never talked to him about the faith. He used some biblical language and things because it's just kind of how you speak in Italian. But I remember one time looking over at him in the living room. I was taking care of him one summer before they went into a nursing home. And he was in his beater, his Italian undershirt, and he had this big yellow gold crucifix on his very hairy chest. And he was watching one of those stupid Italian game shows that was way too loud. And the commercials are about some spread for crackers or something, just like Italian. It's like the Italian Canadian channel. And I look over, and he just takes his crucifix. He does a sign of the cross with it, and then he kisses it, and he points up to the high, and then a little tear comes down his eye, like just out of nowhere. And I was humbled by that. I just thought, wow, that's crazy. It was something I could touch. It was 3-dimensional. It was like the air got thicker, with faith. It was weird. Anyway, little things like that. So when we live out our faith, we have no idea which moment it will be. But at some point, with the amount of interactions that we have with people, with the amount of times that we're doing things and not knowing that people are watching, they'll see something, and we never know which thing is going to inspire them. And that obviously in your families, tonight I'm on my knees praying the rosary in our living room with my kids who are going insane. Tonight was probably not one of the more fruitful rosary nights. But there are some, I don't know. I mean, my kids, and so they're out of my house in 15 years, whatever the old, like, I don't know, out of the thousands of times we're going to pray the rosary together, it might only be one of them where they see their dad and say, oh, wow, he's trying to be a man of God. I don't know. But if it's just one of them, it's worth all the rest.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, something growing up, I always saw my grandfather. He always had a rosary in his hands, always. And my parents, I came from a pretty, broken home, right? Both my parents are divorced when I was in high school. I have a very good relationship with both of my parents. There's no ill will there at all by any means, but my grandparents, right? My dad had fallen away. My mom wasn't really going. It was my grandparents. And if I didn't have the example of my grandfather was having the rosary, I've got a blind grandfather on the other side who went blind when he was 35, and just his example, his knowledge, his brain, his zeal for the faith, and his example through suffering of that blindness was always a really big. So even when I fell away, which, I kind of dabbled in Protestantism for a little while and then came back. But those examples were always what I remembered growing up, And as a kid, you're kind of like, oh, why is he always carrying that thing around? Like, what do they do? Yeah. And then another thing that struck me too is Pope John Paul II. He said he walked in on his dad praying one night on his knees, and that was like boom. And and so I kind of always, thought about that. So yeah, that's no, I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I read your book and read that, I was like, man, that's awesome, because that really starts kind of when we do it with ourselves, that's the principle of subsidiarity, right? You start at the lowest level possible. It goes out to your families. And then from your families, eventually goes to your communities. Eventually you can, if that happens, it can change the world, right? Wouldn't be in this mess today, I think, if, people were.
Yeah. And that's one thing to remember too. I hear a lot from Catholics about, the need to evangelize. And obviously I agree, but you can't give what you don't have. So if you don't have piety, you can't expect it to be in others, if everybody just sort of raised their families to be prayerful, then evangelization would be done.
Yeah, we forget too the power of prayer, right? I mean, that's really everybody wants to do something. And we need to do stuff, right? But it's got to start with the prayer again, kind of going back full circle. And you guys heard it here. I'm not the only one that says that. Can't give what you don't have. That's a big thing I always say. That's huge, right? I can't give my family if I don't have anything. So, that's awesome. Well, that's good stuff. Well, anything else you'd like to share with our listeners? Any besides the book coming up, anything else you're doing besides the it sounds to me like you're still working through the
we're still working through the event. We might have to go virtual, which I hate. I don't know. During the what was your lockdown like? I mean, the first one. Did you guys get back to church relatively quickly, or what?
No, so we here in Virginia, we have it kind of depends on what kind of governor you have. If you have a Democrat governor, you tend to be in a lot longer. If not, you don't. Our lockdown was about 3 months. I mean, the first 2 weeks, it was rough. We were told, it might come back. And then after that 2 weeks, it just got longer and longer. And then finally, they started lessening things. We were able to go back to mass. But yeah, it took about 3 months.
We went back to mass?
Yeah, I didn't have the sacraments till about 2.5, 3 months. So, but our church, I go to a FSSP parish, in the area, and our church was always open, and Father was always there, and there was always confession. Like, we didn't have that problem at all. Like, unfortunately, people in Texas they couldn't even go to confession. So I don't know how that was with you guys up there. How bad was that?
Our priests were great, and they gave confession and communion. Like, they would do like a communion ceremony outside of mass,
on.
Right. Like because you could have groups of 5 basically. There was no rule that said you had to close your churches. There was just a rule saying that you couldn't have gatherings over 5, and that applied also to churches and things.
Okay.
So
same thing here. Yeah.
It's silly. So the motivated priests, depending on what their bishop said, depending on whether or not they did what their bishop said, but it's between them and them and God,
Sure.
They got over man, but they got it done. So we were very lucky. And, but it was after Pentecost for sure. And we were back at mass. I think it was in June, and it was a daily mass on a Friday. And And then we pretty much had outdoor masses ever since. We can have 50 people inside maximum for church and 100 outside. So we do outdoor masses because we can just do a couple on the Sunday rather than 5 indoor ones.
Gotcha. Where we're at, we can have 50% capacity. And so the bishop allowed 4 masses, which he's only allowing 3 for most, but because we're one of the few Latin Rite parishes around, he's allowed 4 because a lot of people are going there because they're one of the few places,
Yep.
Yeah. So it's been pretty interesting. I know in California, it's just a hot mess, figuratively and literally right now. It's burning to the ground. No pun intended. That poor place. Oh my goodness. I'm from the West Coast, so I hate when we get these forest fires. It's terrible. But Archbishop Corleone, right? He just spoke. I don't know if you saw that. His homily where he called out the governor and was like, how come 20% Nordstrom can have 25% capacity, but we can only have one person come into this cathedral at a time? That doesn't make any sense. So we're starting to see our bishops.
Thanks be to God. I mean,
yeah.
Corleone, is it Corleone or Corleone?
Corleone.
So he's
Like the Godfather.
Yes. Oh, there you go. He's known for being relatively conservative, which is ironic for San Francisco. But hey, someone I saw on Twitter earlier, they were saying one of the silver linings of we're going to have a second lockdown here in Canada. And we are. It's just we are not Texas. We are not the place where everyone is freedom loving. We're a liberal country, so we're going to have a second lockdown. The prime minister is apparently going to make our joke of a prime minister is probably going to make a statement. He says he's going to make a statement tomorrow night. Something about how we're going to have economic recovery and how we're going to get through this together or something. I mean, put it in perspective. We had, I think we had 2 deaths last week in our whole province of 14 million people.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Like 14 million. And that's,
that's too many, Kennedy. That is too many.
That's including people who die from getting like hit by a bus, but test positive. That's, and it's whatever. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, no kidding.
But that's where we're at. And the cases are going up. They're testing people, and they're even including people who have immunities, and they're including them as testing. Like if you test positive for antibodies, you count as a test. They're doing 50,000 tests a day. They were only doing like 10,000 tests a day when people were actually in the hospital.
Yeah.
So nobody's sick. I mean, hey, obviously people die, and that's tragic. But
sure.
I just read a stat from England the other week, and the same 2 weeks they measured, or same month they measured, it was an average of 11 people a week in the whole United Kingdom were dying from corona. And it was an average of 120, or it was 124 per week that were dying of the flu.
Yeah. Oh, geez.
So it's like, and that's not during a lockdown. So that's the crazy part is that was during when they have relative freedom. So it's a bananas thing.
Yeah, it blows my mind too. If you just look at the numbers for the United States alone in the world, they both come out to 3% is the death rate for this thing, which is lower than the dang seasonal flu. It blows my mind.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, like of actual like hospitalized cases and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you just look at the hard numbers, how many people, how many tests or how many cases we have versus how many deaths, and then you do the, it's just basic math, and people aren't just looking at the numbers. So
no, it's crazy.
I see a lockdown coming too for some states here in the United States. Obviously, like I said, depends on who you are. Of course, it all depends on the November election too.
Yeah, that's going to be, and it's interesting. I mean, obviously, there was a march in Quebec the other day where there was 70,000 people, and a lot of them were carrying Trump flags.
Oh, right on.
It was crazy. It was interesting.
That is nuts.
Quebec is an interesting place, and there was a lot of QAnon. I never got into QAnon, but there was a lot of QAnon flags and Trump flags, and they were chanting USA. Well, they were chanting USA because the accent. And there were 70,000 of them, and it was a lockdown protest. Trump is a symbol, I mean, obviously he's not the savior, but at the same time, he is sort of one of the last. He's like him, Matteo Salvini, Bolsonaro from Brazil. There's the odd politician who they just kind of don't go globalist.
Yeah.
And they represent kind of the last of the Mohicans for people that believe in, fundamental freedoms and things. So it'll be interesting because we have a saying in Canada, when America sneezes, we catch a cold. And that's very ironic for the coronavirus. So,
Yeah, no kidding.
so if Trump wins, there'll probably be a lot of civil unrest, I would imagine,
Yeah.
in the States. But the influence up here will be palpable, and it'll give people a lot of courage to kind of say, you know what, I think I'm just going to go to mass, and if you want to sue me, you know,
Yeah.
who cares? Trump's president.
I think we're going to get to that soon. I really do. I think if he, well, and people think that people think after the election, everything's just going to go away. Like Biden gets elected.
No, it
It's
won't
just
go
all going to
away.
go away. It's
Yeah.
going to get worse, people. Oh my gosh. I just can't, we already have,
Yeah.
I mean, what was it? Just recently I read an article, I think it was on the Epoch Times and LifeSite News at the same time. Both of them was the DOJ, our Department of Justice, said that New York, Seattle, and Portland were
Anarchist places, right?
Yeah, anarchist places being cited because they weren't doing a thing about it. If you guys think that these people are going to get elected, it's going to go away, you are sad. It's going to get worse. It's going to go everywhere. And with Trump too. I mean, there's going to be civil unrest regardless. It's just the way of the beast. Unfortunately, this is what happens when you take people's screens away, right? They throw a
Well,
fit.
did you see? Do you know who Charles Coulomb is?
No, I don't know.
He's a great scholar, actually, author. He just wrote a biography on Blessed Karl of Austria for 10 books. Anyway, he's got a show called Off the Menu. It's a great podcast and whatever. And he's a historian by trade. And I love his insight. He's just pretty much always correct about things. And he basically said, the situation we're in right now is one where, whether people like it or not, what's historically called a strong man is going to arise. So one of the best examples, really, I think, is 1930s Spain. So for people that don't really know, there was a little sort of a socialist undertone that was going on for a few years, and there was a democratically elected government. They were called the Republicanos, which not Republicans like American. They were actually quite leftist. But they were anti-church, anti-values, all that, pro-artistic expression, pro-science, whatever that means, and pro-destruction of marriage. They were just like your classic leftist.
They're great guys, yeah.
And they killed a lot of priests, and it was very kind of a mini revolution, So Franco, who was the leader of the nationalist monarchist sort of Spanish counter-revolution, got sick of it, and he was actually second in charge, and he came into power because the guy in front of him passed away, I believe. But in any case, they were very Christian, they were very conservative, they were very old school, and they were very well trained. And so, you being a military man, of course, opinions in the military amongst people will differ. Sure. But one thing that's common in the military is that people believe in law and order.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So even a leftist kind of guy in the military, he doesn't believe in rioting and anarchy. I mean, he believes that his country is worth dying for in some capacity. So there's got to be something that should be retained about it. So it was pretty easy for Franco to get the vast majority of military men on his side. They came into the south of Spain, and it was a slaughter. Yeah. Because, think of that kid that Kyle Ritter, whatever his name is, he killed those three guys.
That
17-year-old kid. And
why is he doing that?
And also think about that though. I mean, there's three grown men who all of them turned out to be pedophiles and sex offenders. And they tried to kill him, and he ended up killing two of them and hurt the one guy. Yeah. But the point is there are hundreds of thousands of men in America like that. Ex-veteran or veterans, guys who just are into guns and go to the range and know how to shoot. Yep. It's just, that's America. So these leftists who are pushing things, it's like, the famous psychologist Jordan Peterson. Yeah. He always says, he's like, you don't want to see the alternate reaction. No. Not because I'm not even saying it's justified. I'm just saying it's an inevitability. So Charles Coulomb, he was saying, you're going to see a strong man. And a strong man is basically someone like Franco who comes in and says enough is enough. And things will be so chaotic that people will accept that. So you hope your strong man will be moral. That's true. But it's also possible he might not be. So the civil unrest that's coming, it's going to be interesting to see how it turns out. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, that Kyle, that Ritter kid, I'm glad you mentioned that. I remember my dad spent 30 years law enforcement. So when I saw that, we talked about it quite a bit. He was a police officer for forever. He was a chief of police. That's when he ended up leaving. Oh.
Yeah, so he's got a lot of experience in this kind of stuff. And I was just like, Dad, I don't like that 17-year-old kid. Like, good night. Like, why? First of all, why is he out there? Where's all the men? Standing by. They don't have to do anything. They just got to stand there. Just showing force enough. If you just show, you're there, then you're good. But yeah, I couldn't believe that. And I was honestly surprised, Kennedy, that after that happened, when I saw that, my first initial reaction was, oh, there it is. There's the shot. There's the first shot heard around the world. And it wasn't, thank God. But when's the next one going to be? And yeah, we better hope it's on the right side of history, because that's going to be a mess. But the Immaculate Heart will triumph, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
That's what the fatness is all about.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Well, so just tying it all together, with everything we were just talking about too, it totally falls into us having to have a rule of life and be prepared for these things. We have to be men who are prepared. We have to be men who are close to Christ. If you're not close to Christ, get close to Christ. There's no excuses now. No excuses. We don't have time anyway. Seriously, if there's another lockdown comes or something like that, we don't want to be caught on the other side of that.
Exactly.
And we were meant for times such as these. So we need to take action for our own souls, for our family's souls. And like I said, if you're not right with Christ, if you haven't gone to confession, get there. We've got to. We don't have time. Just get off your butt and do it. Rule of life will help combat all of this and get you into a more disciplinary life, and ultimately just bring you and your family, your community, your country, everything closer to Christ. But it all starts with us. So awesome. Well, mind I'll do the first half of the Our Father. You want to do the second half?
Sure.
End in prayer? Awesome.
Sure.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater noster, qui es in caeli, sanctificetur nomen tuum, et veniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra.
Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitti nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen.
Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Thank you so much, Kennedy, for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Great
you.
getting to know you. Awesome.
I'll send you a copy. I'll send you a copy, an electronic copy of the book when I get it formatted, and then we can talk again soon.
Oh, right on. No, that'd be excellent. I'd love to have you back on again.
Right.
As always, guys, stay intentional, do everything with intention, and stay close to Christ. See you guys later.